He didn't knock. He didn't call ahead. At 8:47 on a Tuesday morning in October, Cole Whitaker walked through the glass doors of Harlan and Voss Engineering and set a business card on the security desk. Whitaker Construction Group, Chairman. 7 years ago, he had been escorted out with a cardboard box and a termination letter stamped with the word fraud. He had not come back to argue. He had not come back to beg. He had come back to buy the company that had destroyed his life, and not one person inside knew it yet. The only one who met his gaze was a woman he had never seen before. The Bridge Corridor project had been the biggest contract Harlan and Voss had ever won, and Cole had been the engineer who made it possible. $47 million from the city of Columbus to rebuild a failing network of bridges across the Scioto River corridor. Cole had spent 18 months on structural plans, subcontractor negotiations, and every detail of a project that would define his career. He had worked at Harlan and Voss for 9 years, promoted 3 times, turning down 2 competing offers because he believed in what the company built. He believed in Bridge Corridor, the way people believe in the most honest thing about them. He discovered the diversion almost by accident. A line item in a quarterly subcontractor payment ledger, an invoice from a company called Meridian Structural Solutions for work that had not appeared in any meeting minutes, any field report, or any site visit log. Cole ran the number back through the master budget. $14 million over 8 months had been routed through Meridian. He pulled the state incorporation records that same evening. Meridian Structural Solutions had been registered 18 months earlier, 2 weeks before the Bridge Corridor bid was submitted. Its registered agent was a man named Thomas Kelly Grant, Harlan's brother-in-law. Cole drafted a formal internal report and sent it to the board of directors on a Monday morning. By Friday, Derek Poole, the CFO, had called him into a closed-door meeting and informed him that an internal audit had uncovered irregularities in Cole's own subcontractor signing authority. The paperwork Poole placed on the table bore his name and his signature, except Cole had never seen those documents before. The termination was effective immediately. The misconduct finding went into his personnel file. 3 days later, First Federal Bank called to inform him that his personal line of credit had been flagged due to his employer's revocation of the income verification letter. The mortgage deferral collapsed with it. Within 6 weeks of filing his report, Cole Whitaker had no job, no credit, and no house. His ex-wife, Sandra, had been looking for a reason to finalize the separation for the better part of 2 years. The misconduct finding gave her attorney a clean argument for temporary primary custody of Ruby, who was 7 years old and didn't understand why her father wasn't coming home. Cole didn't fight it immediately. He didn't have the money for a proper attorney, and he didn't want Ruby sitting in a courtroom watching her parents argue over the wreckage of his career. The last night he spent in Columbus, he sat in his car outside the house he used to own and watched the lights go off room by room. Ruby appeared at the upstairs window for a moment, just a small shape behind the glass, and Cole pressed his hand flat against the dashboard, like a man steadying himself against something moving underneath him. He didn't go to the door. He had $400 in his checking account, a laptop with a cracked hinge, and a decision that he would not let his daughter grow up watching her father beg for things that had already been taken from him. He started the car and drove west, 4 floors above all of this. A woman named Nadia Vale was sitting cross-legged on the floor of a sub-basement storage room with a box of files dated 2017 open in front of her. She had been assigned to conduct a legal risk review ahead of a potential merger standard pre-transaction due diligence, the kind of work that required patience and a tolerance for dust. The file she had just opened bore a case reference number and a name on the first page. Whitaker. Cole M. Internal Misconduct Review. November 2017. Nadia set the file on her knee and began to read. She didn't know that the man this file belonged to had just walked into the lobby downstairs. The Westin Columbus had 63 floors. Cole's temporary office was on the 41st, 2 floors above the point where he could look down onto the rooftop terrace of the Harlan and Voss building directly across Madison Avenue. He had chosen the room deliberately, not for drama, for orientation. When you have spent 7 years working toward a single outcome, it helps to be able to look at the thing clearly while you are planning the final steps. Whitaker Construction Group had started as a 3-person subcontracting crew operating out of a leased warehouse in Kansas City. Cole had spent the first winter sleeping in the cab of a second-hand work truck because a motel room was $40 a night he didn't have. He took every job available: concrete pouring, rebar installation, site prep for residential developments that paid poorly and required driving long distances in bad weather. He did not take shortcuts, and he did not miss deadlines. And within 18 months, he had a reputation in 3 counties for being the subcontractor who showed up and delivered. By the end of the 3rd year, he had 12 employees and a line of credit at a regional bank whose loan officer, a retired Navy commander named Frank Aldrich, had reviewed the conduct finding from 2017, listened to Cole's explanation without interrupting, and approved the loan anyway. Cole had never forgotten that. By 2024, Whitaker Construction Group operated across 9 states with 140 employees and annual revenue approaching $200 million. Cole had accomplished all of it without a single press release and without once using his own name in any transaction touching Harlan and Voss. He had spent 4 years acquiring minority stakes in holding companies, each one a layer in a structure that ultimately held a passive stake in Harlan and Voss. The arrangement was legal, disclosed in aggregate to the SEC, and invisible at the level of any individual name. What Cole needed now was the one document he could not manufacture himself: a clean litigation disclosure from inside Harlan and Voss, confirming that no pending legal claims attached to the company's project assets would complicate the merger. The company's newest attorney, Nadia Vale, who had joined 8 months ago and had not yet been absorbed into the institutional culture of selective memory, was the only person in that building he was willing to trust with the request. His M&A counsel submitted the formal engagement letter on Monday afternoon. Nadia received it Tuesday morning, found no conflict, and accepted the meeting for Wednesday at 10. She did not yet connect Cole Whitaker on the engagement letter to the name she had read in the basement the morning before. Ruth Callahan had worked as executive secretary at Harlan and Voss for 23 years. She knew more about the internal history of the company than anyone who had ever been employed there. She had been at her desk that Friday in 2017 when Derek Poole called Cole Whitaker in and closed the door. She had been at her desk the following Monday when the termination paperwork came through, and she had been sitting 12 feet away from Poole's office the afternoon he made the phone call. She was not supposed to hear the one where he said, quietly and without any visible emotion, that the original copies needed to disappear before the file went to HR. Ruth had not spoken about it in 7 years. Grant Harlan had made the arrangement clear in the kind of language that didn't require documentation. Her pension was tied to her continued employment in good standing. She had a daughter in Portland with 2 young children and a husband on disability. Ruth had done the math. On Wednesday morning, she walked past Nadia's office to deliver a revised vendor contract and saw the name Cole Whitaker printed at the top of the meeting request on Nadia's desk. Ruth stopped. She stood in the hallway for approximately 10 seconds without saying anything. Then she walked back to her own desk, set down the vendor contract, and sat very still. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. The conference room on the 12th floor had a view of the river. Cole sat on one side of the table with a single portfolio in front of him. No laptop, no assistant. Nadia sat across from him with a legal pad and the engagement file. She had worn her dark gray blazer, which she always wore when she wanted to feel like the most prepared person in the room. She opened with standard questions: nature of the transaction, corporate structure of Whitaker Construction Group, geographic footprint. Cole answered each one in plain, unornamented language. He was calm, the way deep water is calm, not still, but nothing visible at the surface. When she asked whether Whitaker Construction had any prior business relationship with Harlan and Voss, he said, "No prior business relationship. But I have a personal history with this company." Nadia looked up from her legal pad. "Before I go further in this review," she said, "I need to ask you, directly, are you connected to the internal misconduct proceeding from November 2017, the Whitaker file?" Cole held her gaze for a moment before answering. "I'm not connected to it," he said. "I am it." There was a pause long enough to hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Nadia set her pen down. She had read enough of the file to know the general shape of what had happened, the allegations, the termination, the subsequent legal silence. The file had read like a case that had been settled. It had the clean, finished texture of a matter that no one intended to revisit. She looked at the man across from her and understood that she had been reading it wrong. "All right," she said. Then she opened the folder she had brought from the basement and turned it to face him. "I found this yesterday. It was in the 2017 archive box. I wasn't sure what it meant. It was a single-page internal memorandum dated November 14th, 2017, signed by Derek Poole." The subject line read, "Re. Whitaker Subcontractor Documentation." The body of the memo contained 3 lines. The third line read, "Dispose of original, keep altered copy on file." Cole looked at the document for a long time without touching it. He had spent 4 years trying to reconstruct the paper trail that would prove what had been done to him. He had obtained bank records, payment ledgers, state filings, testimony from 2 former subcontractors who had been paid through Meridian. He had hired a forensic document examiner in 2020 who had confirmed the signature alterations from secondary copies, but could not establish the original chain of instruction. He had assumed the authorization memo had been destroyed. It had been sitting in a basement file box for 7 years. "That's the authorization," he said quietly. "Poole signed off on replacing my signature documents with altered versions. That memo was supposed to confirm the originals were gone." He looked up at Nadia. They weren't. The room was very quiet for a moment. Outside, a phone rang twice in the hallway and stopped. Nadia reached out and closed the folder. She did not push it back across the table. She set both hands on top of it and looked at Cole with an expression that was not pity and was not professional distance. It was the look of someone who has just understood something they should have understood sooner. "I need to know the whole story," she said, "before I sign anything for you." They stayed in the conference room for 3 hours. Cole did not ask her to keep the meeting off the record. He did not ask for anything. He simply told her what had happened in the order that it happened, without embellishment and without any of the performance of grievance that tends to accumulate over years of injustice. He described the project, the discovery, the report. He described the termination. He described sitting in his car outside his house with his daughter's silhouette in the upstairs window. And he said it the way you say a fact, not the way you say something you want someone to feel sorry for. He told her about Kansas City, about the truck, about driving through a Missouri ice storm in February of 2018 on the way to a concrete pour that paid $900 and took 2 days, about the subcontracts that fell through when companies ran background checks and found the misconduct flag, about the years when Ruby's calls came in at 8 o'clock every Sunday and he would pull over wherever he was and answer on the first ring, because the one thing he had promised himself was that she would always reach him when she called. Nadia listened. She did not take notes after the first 10 minutes. There was something in the way Cole spoke, not dramatized, not performed, that made note-taking feel like the wrong response. She found herself thinking about her father. James Vale had been a civil engineer with a small firm in Dayton, a quiet man who had designed bridge supports and drainage systems for 30 years before his firm was swallowed by a larger corporation that disputed his contract terms, withheld 3 years of deferred compensation, and left him without the resources to litigate. He had spent the last 2 years of his life at a desk in the spare bedroom, with his engineering files spread across the surface, still trying to find the document that would make the case clearly enough for someone to act on it. He had died of a stroke in March of 2019, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal he hadn't finished. The file he had been working on was still open on his desk. Nadia had been the one to close it. She had never told anyone at work about him. She didn't tell Cole now, but she felt the parallel, the way you feel weather coming not yet visible, but already present in every breath. At some point, Cole asked her, "Why were you in the archive in the first place?" She almost smiled. "I was assigned to conduct legal risk review ahead of a merger, pre-transaction due diligence." She paused. "I didn't know I was reviewing files for the person who was going to sit across from me the next morning." Cole looked at her for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but in the same direction. That's either a significant coincidence, he said, or the universe has a very specific sense of humor. I'm going with coincidence, Nadia said. For now. She stood and walked to the window. Below, the river was flat and gray in the October light, and the old bridge piers were visible just below the surface of the water, the ones from the original infrastructure that the bridge corridor project had been meant to replace. If this document is authentic, she said, without turning around, and I think it is, then I'm sitting inside the offices of people who destroyed your life, and I've been working for them for 8 months. She turned. I need to decide what that means. Ruth Callahan's office was on the 9th floor, a small interior room that she had furnished herself over 20 years, with a blue ceramic lamp, 3 photographs of her grandchildren, and a windowsill plant that had somehow survived 3 office renovations. Nadia knocked on the open door the following morning and set the pool memorandum on Ruth's desk without saying anything first. Ruth looked at it. Her face did not change the way a guilty person's face changes. It changed the way an exhausted person's face changes when something they've been carrying for a very long time is finally placed on a table where they don't have to carry it alone. She put the document down very slowly. Where did you find this? She said. Archive box, sub-basement B2, Nadia said. 2017. Ruth nodded, very slightly. That box was supposed to be destroyed in 2018. I put in the destruction request myself. She paused. Someone must have missed it. Nadia sat in the chair across from her and waited. Ruth spoke for 40 minutes. She described the afternoon in November 2017 when she had been at her desk and heard Derek Poole's voice through the closed door of his office on a call with someone she could not identify, using the phrase the original documents need to be replaced before the review. She described the afternoon 2 days later when Poole came out of his office, handed her a sealed envelope, and asked her to place it in the 2017 project files under the Whitaker Subcontractor tab. She had done it. She had not opened the envelope, but she had held it long enough to feel the weight of what was inside, and she had known then, in the quiet certainty that experience gives you, that she was holding something that was meant to end someone's career. She described the conversation that had come after not a threat, exactly. Grant Harlan himself had stopped by her desk that same week and mentioned, in the course of what seemed like a routine conversation, that the company was reviewing its pension obligations for long-term employees. He had smiled when he said it. He had asked after her daughter. She had understood. I've known since 2017, Ruth said. I've known every day since. I have 2 grandchildren in Portland, and my daughter can't. She stopped. She straightened her hands on the desk. I'm 61 years old. I've been coming into this building for 23 years. I'm not afraid of losing this job anymore. I'm afraid of dying having never said it. The room was quiet for a moment. Nadia didn't fill it. She had learned, in 3 years of legal practice, that the most important thing a witness can say is usually the thing they say after the sentence they thought was the last one. Nadia walked out of Ruth's office, took the elevator to the lobby, pushed through the glass doors, and stood on the Madison Avenue sidewalk in the October cold. She called Cole. I have a witness, she said. Her voice was level. Her right hand, holding the phone, was not. 3 seconds of silence. Then Cole. Do you understand what that means? Yes, Nadia said. And I'm still calling you. That evening, Derek Poole reviewed the security camera logs for the 9th floor. The camera showed 11 minutes and 40 seconds of elapsed time inside Ruth's office. He pulled up the lobby footage from Tuesday morning and cross-referenced the visitor log. The name Whitaker appeared in the guest register. Poole sat at his desk for a long time after that, thinking about the shape of what was coming. Cole picked up Ruby from school on Thursday afternoon. She was 13 and had her mother's dark hair and her father's eyes, and she carried herself with the particular self-containment of a child who had learned early that the adults in her life were dealing with things they hadn't finished dealing with. She climbed into the passenger seat, set her backpack on the floor, and looked out the window without saying anything. Cole let the silence run for 6 blocks. He had learned, in the years of Sunday phone calls and bi-weekly custody exchanges, that Ruby's silences were not hostile, They were the spaces she used to decide whether the moment was worth speaking into. She had been a serious child since she was small, not quiet exactly, but economical, choosing her words the way some children choose which stones to skip across water, with attention and intent. He had missed so many ordinary afternoons with her. He still hadn't found a way to account for them, not in any language that didn't sound like self-pity, which was the one register he had refused to use. He thought about all the Tuesday and Thursday school pickups he had not been there for, the recitals, the parent-teacher conferences, the ordinary dinners where nothing important happened but the food was warm and the chair across from her wasn't empty. He had missed those things by choice, not because he didn't want them, but because he had calculated, in those first raw months after leaving, that returning empty-handed would cost her more than his absence. He still believed that, most days. "What are you doing in Columbus?" she asked finally. "Settling something old," he said. She thought about that. "Is it the thing from when I was 7? "Yes." "How long did it take you to get ready?" 7 years. Ruby was quiet for another block. Then, without looking at him, she said, "I've been waiting 7 years too." Cole didn't answer that. He couldn't, quite. He kept his hands where they were on the wheel and drove. That evening, Nadia came to the hotel to go over the documentation they had assembled. Cole met her in the lobby with Ruby still beside him. Ruby had a book and Cole hadn't wanted to send her upstairs alone. Nadia arrived at the same moment they did, and there was a brief, unrehearsed introduction. Cole, saying Nadia's name, Ruby looking up from her book with the frank evaluative gaze that teenagers deploy before they've decided whether a person is worth paying attention to. Nadia didn't crouch down or speak in the softened register that adults use when they've decided children need to be managed. She just looked at Ruby and asked what she was reading. Ruby held up the cover. "The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy." "Which part?" Nadia asked. "The part where everything blows up," Ruby said. Nadia nodded. "Best part of the whole book." Ruby looked at her for another second, recalibrating slightly. Then she went back to her book. Nadia glanced at Cole. Cole was looking at his daughter with an expression that had something unfamiliar in it, something lighter than strategy, lighter than grief, something he hadn't made room for in 7 years of planning. He had spent 7 years knowing exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it. For the first time in a long time, something was happening that wasn't part of the plan. He didn't try to name it. He just noted it, the way an engineer notes an unexpected load distribution, something that changes the math without breaking the structure. Grant Harlan's office was on the 14th floor, corner suite, engineered to communicate power. He had run Harlan and Voss for 26 years and had managed departures, regulatory inquiries, and one substantial fraud successfully reframed as an isolated accounting error. He was not a man who panicked easily, but he had spent 40 minutes that morning watching security footage Nadia Vale entering Ruth Callahan's office, Ruth's door remaining closed for an unusual period, Nadia walking directly to the elevator afterward without stopping at her desk, and what he felt as he watched it was not quite panic. It was the specific unease of a man who has maintained a structure through constant, invisible pressure and has just detected a shift somewhere in the foundation. He called Nadia into his office at 2 in the afternoon. He poured 2 cups of coffee and began the conversation with the practiced ease of a man who had negotiated under pressure many times. He acknowledged that she had been conducting a thorough due diligence review. He said he respected thoroughness. He said the company had been thinking about its legal leadership team and that there was a general counsel position under discussion, a role that would double her current compensation and position her as a named officer of the Twelfakis Limited, his company, before she turned 35. He said all of this while watching her face. Nadia listened without interrupting. She asked 2 brief questions about the role's reporting structure. Harlan answered them. Then she thanked him and said she would need some time to consider. She walked directly back to her office, closed the door, and sat without moving for 2 minutes. The Whitaker file was in her bottom desk drawer. She opened the drawer, looked at it, and thought about her father. She thought about how many people had had the opportunity to stand beside James Vale in 2015 and 2016 and 2017, when his contract dispute was still live, when the documentation was still available, when something might still have been salvageable. She thought about how none of them had. She picked up her phone and called Cole. "I was just offered a promotion," she said. "In exchange for not going further with this, what did you say?" "I said I needed time to consider." A pause. "I've considered. What's the next step?" Cole's answer surprised her. He didn't begin with the documentation, or the legal strategy, or the timeline for the merger disclosure. He said, "Before I tell you the next step, you should know the full picture, because what I'm about to tell you changes the shape of this significantly." He had not purchased only minority equity stakes through the holding company chain. 18 months earlier, when Harlan and Voss had undergone a capital restructuring and refinanced its primary operating line of credit, the original lender, a Wells Fargo regional commercial banking division, had subsequently sold that loan as part of a packaged debt transfer to a private investment vehicle. The vehicle was a fund called Meridian Capital Partners, a name Cole had chosen with careful deliberateness, the same name as the shell company that had stolen the bridge corridor money. Meridian Capital Partners was owned entirely by Cole Whitaker. Harlan and Voss owed $80 million to Cole Whitaker. They had been paying him interest for 18 months. Not a single person in the company knew. "I didn't come here to destroy the company," Cole said. "I came here to own it, and to give the people who work inside it something better than what Harlan's been giving them for 26 years. Nadia was quiet for a long moment. "That is," she said finally, "an extremely specific kind of patience." 7 years, Cole said. It was Derek Poole who found the thread. He had been running background checks on Whitaker Construction Group since Wednesday, and the beneficial ownership structure had taken his financial analyst 3 days to trace through the holding companies. On Friday afternoon, the analyst set a report on Poole's desk. Poole read it twice. Then he walked upstairs to Harlan's office and placed it on the desk without saying anything. Harlan read it. He reached for his coffee cup and set it down hard enough that the coffee came over the rim and spread across the document. He looked up at Poole. "Get him out of this city," he said. The board meeting was called for Monday morning. Cole arrived alone. Harlan's outside counsel had prepared a buyout offer for the debt position, $160 million, double the face value, with a standard non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement attached. The board members sat in a row on the far side of the conference table with the careful expressions of people who were not entirely sure which way the room was going. Harlan sat at the head of the table. He looked at Cole and offered a handshake. Cole did not take it. He sat down. Cole read the offer document from the first page to the last, without expression. Then he set it down and placed a different set of documents in the center of the table. The first was the Poole Memorandum, the original, with the chain of custody documented by Nadia's archival log. The second was a notarized statement from Ruth Callahan, 4 pages, describing in precise detail what she had witnessed in November 2017. The third was 112 pages of financial records, bank transfers, Meridian Structural Solutions, payment ledgers, state incorporation filings, subcontractor payment records that Cole had spent 7 years reconstructing from public records, FOIA requests, and the testimony of 2 former Meridian employees who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for documentation that cleared their own names. "This isn't a negotiation," Cole said. He looked at each person at the table in turn. "This is a notification. What happens next depends entirely on how this board chooses to respond." Nadia was standing near the window on the far side of the room. She was not Cole's attorney of record. She had resigned her position at Harlan and Voss the previous Thursday morning, effective immediately, without a counteroffer discussion, and without a farewell email to the team. She had simply cleared her desk, returned her key card to the front desk, and walked out. She had come today because Cole had asked her to be there, and because she had decided, without making a formal announcement of it, that standing in that room on that morning was the right thing to do. Grant Harlan looked at her across the room. "You've violated your confidentiality obligations to this company," he said. Nadia looked back at him. "I fulfilled my ethical obligations to the law," she said. "Those aren't the same thing." Cole turned to look at Harlan last. There was no anger visible in his expression, no satisfaction either. There was something quieter than both, the composure of a man who has carried something heavy for such a long distance that he no longer needs to put it down dramatically. He simply sets it down. Cole had rehearsed this moment. Not in front of a mirror, he was not that kind of man, but in the cab of work trucks, in motel rooms, in the 45 minutes before dawn when the job site was quiet and his mind would not stay still. He had rehearsed what he would feel. What he had not expected was that he would feel so little of it, not because he had stopped caring, because he had already won, 7 years ago, the moment he decided not to let it end him. "I didn't come here to destroy you," Cole said. "I came here to make sure you don't do this to anyone else." Harlan said nothing. His attorney placed a hand on his arm. The board members looked at the documents in front of them and did not look up. One of them, a woman near the end of the table who had joined the board only 14 months earlier, reached forward and turned the pool memorandum toward herself to read it again. She read it twice. Then she set it back down and folded her hands and said nothing. But she did not look away from it. The settlement was reached out of court 11 days later. Grant Harlan resigned as CEO effective immediately. Derek Poole resigned the same afternoon. The board appointed an interim CEO from outside the company and engaged an independent auditing firm to conduct a full review of the Bridge Corridor financial records. The civil settlement included formal retraction of the 2017 misconduct finding, which was expunged from every applicable record. A press release described the leadership changes as part of a planned strategic transition. No one was quoted by name. Cole accepted a portion of the settlement directly. The remainder, the exact dollar amount that corresponded to what he had lost in 2017, calculated to the last cent, with the help of a forensic accountant who had been working the case for 3 years, he placed into a fund he called the Bridge Corridor Fund, administered by a nonprofit board, with the stated purpose of providing legal and financial assistance to independent engineers and contractors who had suffered damages in disputes with larger firms. His own M&A attorney had suggested he keep more of the money. Cole had explained, once, why he wasn't going to. She had not asked again. He announced no press release. He registered the fund, seeded it, appointed a director, and moved on. Ruth Callahan submitted her retirement paperwork the Monday after the settlement was signed. Before she cleared her desk, she stopped by her windowsill plant and carried it to the kitchen down the hall, leaving a small handwritten note beside it. "For whoever wants it, it likes morning light." Cole sent her a letter by hand, not email, not a card. A letter, 2 sentences, on plain paper. "You spoke when it mattered." That's all anyone can do. Ruth read it at her kitchen table in Bexley, folded it in half, and put it in the drawer where she kept things she wanted to keep. The temporary signage on the building had gone up during the transition week, clean white letters against a dark background. Whitaker Group. Cole sat on the front steps in the late afternoon, and Nadia sat beside him, and neither of them said anything for a while. They watched a delivery truck make a wide turn on Madison Avenue, and the pigeons scatter and resettle on the roofline of the building across the street. It was getting cold. Neither of them moved. Cole had imagined this moment many times over 7 years, what it would feel like to sit in front of the building with his name on it. He had expected something larger. What he felt was quieter than that. Not disappointment. Something closer to relief. The way a long-held breath finally releases, not dramatic, just necessary. "What do you do now?" Nadia asked. "Figure out what comes next," Cole said. "You?" She looked up at the sign. "I think I just lost my job." "Whitaker Group is currently looking for a general counsel," Cole said. Nadia glanced at him. "That would be a significant conflict of interest." "Or," Cole said, "a very good start." 6 months later, Ruby Whitaker was in 8th grade, at a school in Columbus. She had asked to transfer there when Cole's custody arrangement was formalized, and she had joined the school's engineering elective, which met on Tuesday afternoons in a room that smelled like wood glue and ambition. Her current project was a model bridge constructed from balsa wood sticks and craft wire. She had been working on it for 3 weeks, coming in early some mornings to add bracing, adjusting the tension in the wire, supports with the meticulous patience of someone who understood intuitively that structural integrity is built in small corrections, not dramatic interventions. Her teacher had asked the class to name their projects. Most students picked things like Phoenix or Titan. Ruby had named hers Bridge Corridor. The teacher asked her why. Ruby thought about it for a moment. In the careful, unhurried way, she approached questions that deserved a real answer. "My dad built that," she said. "The real one. People took it from him, but then he built it back." Cole came to pick her up on a Tuesday in April. Nadia was with him not because they had planned it that way, but because she had been at his office that afternoon going over a vendor contract, and it was a reasonable direction to drive. Ruby spotted them from across the schoolyard, registered the fact of both of them standing together without comment, and jogged over with her bridge model cradled in both hands. She held it out for Cole to see. One of the diagonal support members was missing from the left side, a gap in the lattice that should have compromised the whole structure. The bridge was holding anyway. "I ran out of sticks," Ruby said. "It's still standing." Cole took the bridge carefully and turned it over in his hands, looking at the gap where the support should have been. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes missing something doesn't make it fall." Nadia stood a few feet back and watched the two of them, the father looking at the thing his daughter had built, the daughter watching her father understand it. She felt something shift in her chest, not a closing, not an erasure, just a quiet readjustment, the way a structure settles when the weight that was pressing unevenly on it is finally redistributed. She thought about her father's file, still in the box where she had placed it after clearing his desk. She thought that someday she might open it again, not to grieve, but to finish reading. He had deserved someone to finish reading. There is a version of this story that ends with a reckoning with someone standing up in a room and demanding to be given back what was taken. Cole Whitaker did not tell that version. He told the version that ends with a company under new management, a fund that carries the name of the project that almost finished him, a letter in an old woman's kitchen drawer, and a 13-year-old girl holding a bridge with a piece missing that still holds together. Cole Whitaker never said he had won. He said he had come back, and this time he stayed.